Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates. My name is Bryce, and as always, I am here with my equity mate buddy, Alec. How are you going?
I'm good, Bryce. I'm really looking forward to this episode. We're speaking to one of the best in the business about, I guess, an investing theme, you could say, that we're both particularly interested in, and I know a lot of the Equity Mates community are quite interested in as well.
Yeah, we are going to be discussing investing in Asia, and it is our pleasure to welcome Chris Wheldon, who is the portfolio manager of the High Conviction Fund at Magellan. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, nice. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, Jen. It's great to see you.
It is always a pleasure chatting with you. We've had you on the podcast for a couple of episodes, and they always go down very well. As we said, investing in Asia is the theme of today.
Yep.
A lot going on over there, some huge companies starting to emerge and sort of take over. Where does your approach start when it comes to thinking about investing in Asia?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad and big, exciting part of the world, right? I think, with Magellan's specific lens on, at the end of the day, we're looking for wonderful businesses, and we're almost agnostic in terms of which geographies and which industries they're in. But if we're talking about Asia, you really have to start with China. That sort of seems to be the most dynamic and interesting place for a lot of investors looking forward over the coming decades. We are most interested and most excited in the sort of consumption trend, and particularly the consumption opportunity really at the top end of the socioeconomic pyramid in China going forward. So you've got this big rotation that's taking place in the Chinese economy away from this legacy economic model that was focused on exports and fixed asset investment and stuff like that. And that's transitioning gradually to a sort of domestic-led, internal consumption-led economic model. And so there'll be all sorts of businesses and industries that benefit from that trend. Given our focus on really high quality businesses at Magellan, you can find Chinese businesses that benefit from those trends, and you can find Western businesses that benefit from those trends. But we're really looking for those businesses that will participate in these very large and growing addressable markets in China and across broader Asia, but where you can have real conviction that they will be the winners 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So it's businesses like some of the the luxury goods companies we've been really interested in. Starbucks has a big play on the growth in the middle class and the upper class in China, and some of the domestic tech platforms, the Alibabas and the Tencents, they will continue to benefit from this sustained transition towards this new economic model and the growth in consumption in China. So that's probably the area across Asia of most interest to us, is that domestic consumption opportunity within China.
So when you're thinking about that shift from the export-based economy to a consumption-based economy in China, is there anything you sort of think differently when you're thinking about Chinese consumption compared to Western consumption, or is all consumption just consumption?
No, there are differences, and we can get into sort of differences around industry structure and winners and losers and things like that. But yes, there are some differences. I mean, you certainly see within, let's call it more developed Western markets like Australia, the US, UK, some of these consumption markets tend to be more mature and more stable. Whereas in China, a lot of these industries are still at their very early stages, and it's quite dynamic and quite competitive still, and there's still a fair bit of flux in these industries. So the long-term winners in certain of these industries aren't yet identifiable, we would argue. However, in some cases, the winners are a little bit more obvious today, and hopefully going forward as well. And it would be, businesses like Alibaba in e-commerce. It's a very competitive marketplace. You've got JD, you've got PDD, Meituan increasingly as well. A lot of competitors in there, but you can have a very high degree of confidence that Alibaba and its e-commerce platforms 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they may not be as dominant in the future as they are today, but they'll still be very competitive, very large players. And just remember, the overall pie is expanding. So their slice of the pie may shrink, but the overall pie is getting so much larger, it's going to benefit all the players, including businesses like Ali.
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, you can't go past speaking about political uncertainty and those sorts of things when it comes to investing in China. How do you think about positioning or position sizing when it comes to making investments in these businesses versus the likes of Facebook or Google?
It's such a good question. I'm going to be a little provocative.
Nice. We like that. We like that.
What's your mind? I would suggest to you, and I am being a little deliberately provocative here, so perhaps political uncertainty within China might be lower because the rules of the road are actually quite well established. And so the Chinese Communist Party has quite a tight grip on power, and you know what their agenda is, and you know what their priorities are and their objectives. They're quite transparent with respect to those objectives in their 5-year plans and things like that. So is there more or less economic or political uncertainty? Perhaps there's less because the rules of the road are quite well established in China. You may not agree with all of them and they may not all be good or bad or, or everything in between, but they're quite clear what they are. The Communist Party is focused in terms of its self-interest around the preservation of the party, of the communist society, of economic development in China. So that is actually quite well established. You could argue political uncertainty is lower enough. I just perhaps bring it to life with a recent example with Jack Ma
I was
and
gonna say,
anti-IPO. So I'll ask you guys, what was the more or less surprising outcome in that story? Was Jack Ma's behaviour more or less surprising, or was the Communist Party's response to Jack's behaviour more or less surprising? I found Jack's behaviour very surprising and not the response from the government to his behaviour.
Yeah, I think so. That was the second big thing Ma had done to offend the Communist Party. And I guess you're right. Maybe the Communist Party is predictable, but it is still, I guess a cap on free expression and economic freedom and stuff like that. Surely that has to factor into your calculations, regardless of how predictable.
Yeah, as provocative as I was trying to be, you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is a different system of government. It's a different economic system, different legal system, all those sort of things. So in terms of the work we do on behalf of clients and portfolio construction, to your question, we're so mindful around business and industry risk, just competitive issues, and then regulatory issues and political interference issues, agency risk issues with the VIE structures and things like that. That's pretty unique to China. Broader sort of economic trends at the domestic level. Then, of course, you've got all the sort of foreign and geopolitical issues to consider as well, particularly the US-China relation, which seems to be most front and centre at the moment.
We've touched a lot on China, and I think it would be good to get to some company comparisons. The Google v Baidu, the Facebook v WeChat. Before we do, are there any other particular Asian markets that take your fancy? We talk a bit about India just because of the population size and stuff like that. But are there any other Asian markets that you're interested in at Magellan?
I think yes is the simple answer. We're looking for high quality businesses that have enduring tailwinds. And China and that consumption opportunity in China is definitely a pretty fertile place for us to be fishing at the moment. But you can argue the same thing with India and the growth in the middle class there, Southeast Asian markets, Vietnam and Indonesia, Malaysia and so on. There will be really interesting pockets of growth. Where we differ a little bit is we want to find those super high quality businesses that play towards those thematics over time. So while we can sort of identify these broader economic sources of growth, if we can't find the businesses where we have really high degree of conviction in their quality and their value, we'll just pass until such time that they're cheap or, the long-term winners become more apparent to us.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's some, Magellan, at least last time we spoke, was invested in Tencent. Is that still invested there?
Still invested. Yeah.
And they've sort of pioneered this idea of the super app, and WeChat, sort of everything's built on it now, and it's there for everything. And you're seeing in some of these other Southeast Asian markets, especially, similar super apps, get developed.
Yeah.
Do you sort of expect a lot of those Chinese tech companies to have, I guess, cousins in these Southeast Asian markets and India and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. There is this sort of path dependency in all these different markets around the development of these digital platforms. And you don't sort of see the same super app type of platform in Western markets that are more mature, like Facebook and, for example, in the United States. But you definitely see in China, with Tencent, for example, Meituan, you could argue, is also another one of these super apps. You're seeing that same sort of model develop in Indonesia and other markets within Southeast Asia as well, because it's such a dominant business model. If you can create it, it's hard to do, but if you can do it and sort of become the portal through which all these consumers engage with digital services and purchase digital goods, that is such a profitable business model. And Tencent, I completely agree, has pioneered that. And fortunately for us, they have small ownership in a lot of these other upcoming businesses
It's
in
crazy,
other parts of Asia.
We were looking at it, and it's like between 700 and 800 venture capital investments that they have.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
It's pretty cool.
Including like 5% of Afterpay here in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, you just go down the list: Meituan, JDD, PDD, Spotify, Tesla. I mean, they're invested across the board.
So, Chris, you run the High Conviction Fund, and that means what? 10, 15 stocks?
Less. 8 to 12.
8 to 12. Jeez.
Real
So
punchy.
when it comes to Facebook, Tencent, Google, Amazon, I mean, you can't take them all. So how do you think about this sort of play of which one are you going to be backing sort of longer term?
It's such a good question. The only one in that list we don't own currently is Amazon.
Okay.
And the only reason we haven't is just price discipline or value discipline. And perhaps we've been wrong around that. But we've been pretty deliberate around trying to model the different pieces, come to a fair value estimate or a range is what we tend to do. And Amazon's never really got into that sweet spot for us.
Yeah, right.
Compared to the rest of the opportunities we have, like Alphabet and Facebook and Tencent and Ali, all the other businesses you just mentioned. We do own those other 4 big platforms though, the 2 Chinese ones, Tencent and Alibaba, and Alphabet and Facebook. You could argue through those businesses, we're getting exposure to a lot of the same thematics that Amazon would provide, e-commerce, cloud computing, digital advertising. Amazon's a wonderful business. At the right price, we'd be very, very happy owners. But you're right, in a concentrated portfolio, you're often replacing something that you've often got a lot of high conviction in. So it's a friction, it's a necessary friction, it's a good friction to have. But Amazon just hasn't yet filled one of those slots, and we'll see what happens.
And just to follow on that, 8 stocks in a market like this where it's pretty frothy and there's kind of a lot going on, how are you currently seeing the market, I guess, more broadly?
First of all, we take a long-term approach. So I wouldn't disagree that there are certainly pockets of the market where you're seeing some potential excess and some pretty speculative behaviour. There might be other pockets of the market where there's some real value, and we're finding that at the moment. At the end of the day, for us, if we have conviction and retain conviction in the long-term fundamental prospects for that business, and that business hasn't got to an excessive price, we'll tend to just hold and go on that compounding journey. But there are definitely occasions where a business, even a great one, will get to a price where there's just a better relative opportunity for clients' capital. And so I think over the last 12 months, we had a large position in Apple, which we rotated out of. We had a large position, probably a mistake to date. Large position in Estee Lauder on a short-term basis, also probably a mistake. But we're rotating that into very high-quality businesses also, but where we feel like the prospective returns are more aligned with what we're trying to achieve for clients.
Now, Chris, Bryce has said a couple of times that you manage a high conviction fund. So I want to ask
Say it again.
I want to ask you a high conviction question as we get towards the end of our time here.
Yeah.
We talk about the big US tech stocks, the Amazons, the Apples, the Alphabets of the world, and China have their equivalents, the Tencents, the Alibabas, all of that. So the high conviction question is, if you had to hold one of their baskets for the next, let's call it 10, 15 years, the big US tech or big Chinese tech?
Or at current prices, or
current prices. Yeah,
oh, that is a tough question. I'll probably stick with US tech still. Okay. I was leaning towards China because I think Alibaba just looks incredible value at the moment. But I also think Facebook does as well. I think there's a lot of risks that are relevant and reasonable and should be considered, but they seem to be very priced in. I just think what Zuckerberg's doing at the moment with respect to his R&D budget, the investments he's making for future growth in e-commerce, coming back to this super app point that we were talking about with the Chinese platforms earlier, what Zuck's investing in with respect to e-commerce, Mark Zuckerberg. My mate.
Yeah, your mate. First name basis over there. It's the second name.
Not really. E-commerce payments, VR, AR, future computing platforms, all this stuff that they're doing is really exciting. I don't think that's in the price at all at the moment. And behind the scenes, that core social network that they have just continues to grow and expand and is incredibly profitable. And he's been a wonderful capital allocator as well. We spoke about Pony Ma at Tencent and this very wide and broad portfolio he has. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has made some wonderful investments as well over time.
This is what I just find fascinating about investing, just quickly before we do need to wrap, but we spoke with Nick Griffin only 7 days ago, who's completely sold his entire Facebook position, and then we'll come in and speak with the likes of yourself who have such conviction on them for the longer term, and it's it just makes the whole thing so fascinating for us trying to figure out what on earth is going on.
That was a great interview too with Nick, by the way, and I don't discount any of his arguments.
Yeah, I'm not trying to compare. It's just fascinating that you can have such different views on what's going on and still kind of make money in the process.
Hopefully.
So hopefully.
One of us will.
But Chris, as always, it's an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I'm sure we could continue to unpack this for many more hours, but that is all we have time for, so thank you very much.
Pleasure, guys. Great to see you.
That is all we have time for on today's episode. Always a pleasure to speak from Chris. If you would like more information on Equity Mates, head to equitymates.com, or alternatively, you can email us at contact@equitymates. Ren.
Yeah, well, that's it for us this week. Hope everyone has a good weekend. Hope the markets behave tomorrow on Friday.
Don't.
And we'll see you all next week for another big week of Equity Mates content, where we speak to some experts, talk about some things that are interesting us, and get a little bit smarter on this investing journey.
See you then.